Have you ever done something totally out of character? Something you never thought you'd do. Like you always saw yourself as a good person, but then suddenly you make this choice and it's completely against everything you believe in.
It's so interesting, right? Because we think of ourselves as rational people, but then we do things that just don't make sense.
Yeah, it's kind of wild.
This
And
is
that's what we're
it.
diving into today. It's the dark side of human nature.
Yeah, and there's this fascinating excerpt from The Dark Side of Human Nature, and it's called Understanding Moral Choice.
Oh, interesting.
It really dives into why we do these things, why we're not always as rational as we think we are.
So are you saying we're not secretly evil,
Mm-hmm.
but there are these psychological traps just waiting for us to fall into them?
Exactly. It's like these hidden tripwires. You think you're on solid ground, but then bam, you stumble.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these traps.
Well, think about it this way. You've got your logical brain. It wants to make the right decisions, the good choices. But then you've got all these other forces at play, right? Your emotions, your instincts, and then the pressure from society, from other people. It's like this constant push and pull.
It's like a battle going on inside our heads.
Yeah, and sometimes those darker impulses, those things we try to keep hidden, they find just the right moment, the perfect conditions, and that's when they take over.
Okay, that's kind of scary. But let's break these traps down one by one. So what's the first one?
Let's start with the justification trap. The book talks about this, how our brains are always trying to protect us, even if it means twisting the truth a little, or maybe a lot.
To avoid feeling guilty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We do something we know is wrong, and then our minds just scramble, trying to make it seem okay, even if it's not.
Oh, that's so true. I totally do that.
It's called cognitive dissonance. The book actually mentions this really cool study.
Okay, what happened?
So they had people do this super boring task for hours and hours, just incredibly dull stuff. And afterwards, they paid some of the participants a tiny amount to tell the next person that the task was fun.
So they had to lie.
Yeah. And guess what? The people who only got paid a little bit, almost nothing really, they ended up convincing themselves that the task was actually enjoyable. Isn't that wild?
Wow. It's like their brains couldn't handle the lie if they weren't getting something out of it.
Right. Their minds couldn't deal with the fact that they were lying for almost no reward, so they changed how they thought about it, just to feel better about themselves. Less conflicted.
That is messed up. But you know what? It's also kind of relatable. I remember this one time I was late to meet a friend, and I completely blamed it on traffic.
Oh, I've been there.
But the truth is, I left late because I was totally binge watching a show. And in that moment, I convinced myself it was totally the traffic's fault.
Classic justification trap. The book even talks about how we do this with way bigger things too. It's not just being late, it's like cheating or lying to people we care about, even stealing.
So we basically make ourselves believe it's okay.
Yeah, we find ways to justify it, to make it feel like we're not really doing anything wrong.
Yeah. We even try to make it seem like it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So we don't have to feel guilty.
Exactly. We protect ourselves from feeling bad.
So how do we stop doing this? What's the fix?
It's brutal, but honesty is key, like radical honesty.
What does that even mean?
It means the next time you're about to justify something, ask yourself this. Would I accept this excuse from somebody else? If someone else told me this, would I believe them?
Okay.
And if the answer is no, well, then you're probably trying to trick yourself.
That is good advice. Ouch. All right, what's the next trap we should talk about?
Let's talk about the herd mentality.
Oh, I've heard of that.
It's all about social pressure. It's like this deep need that we have to fit in, to belong.
Right, because we're social creatures.
Exactly. We evolved in groups, and way back in the day, if you were kicked out of the group, well, that was basically a death sentence.
It's survival.
Yeah. And that instinct is still so strong today. We don't want to be different, even if it means doing stuff we don't agree with, things that go against our values.
It's like being back in school. If everyone's making fun of someone, it's so hard to be the one to say, hey, stop, even if you know it's wrong.
The book actually gives some even darker examples, like people going along with lies because everyone else is, or even participating in bullying because they're afraid of becoming the next target.
It's kind of terrifying, right? How easily we can be influenced by others.
It is. So the question is, how do we break free from that?
Right. Do we all have to become hermits, live in caves and avoid everyone else?
Not exactly. It's more about practice, saying no. Surround yourself with people who share your values, who lift you up.
That makes sense. Choose your friends wisely.
And one thing that can really help is to mentally rehearse. Imagine yourself disagreeing with the crowd.
Oh, that's interesting.
You feel that pressure,
Right.
but you stand your ground. The more you practice, even just in your mind, the easier it becomes in real life.
Practice makes perfect,
Yeah.
even with, like, moral courage.
Right. Okay, ready for the next trap? This one might be a bit unsettling.
Hit me with it.
It's called the power corruption effect.
Okay, power corrupts. I've heard that before.
It's more than just the saying, though. It's the idea that power can actually change people, even those who start out good.
Oh, interesting. So it's not that bad people seek power, it's that power makes them bad.
Yeah, and the more power someone has, the less they see others as equals, rules. They don't think those apply to them.
Is that like that famous Stanford prison experiment? The one where the students were divided into guards and prisoners?
Exactly. Those regular students, they became cruel just because they were given a little bit of authority.
That's a little scary.
And that experiment, plus tons of real-life examples, they all show how power can just warp your perception, your whole view of the world.
So nice bosses become tyrants, and honest politicians turn corrupt.
The more power they get, the more out of touch they become.
Do you think it's like power is addictive?
You know, it actually is. When we use power, our brains, they release dopamine. Yeah, it's the same chemical that's involved in pleasure and rewards. So when we boss people around, we get this little hit of feel-good chemicals.
Oh, that's a bit of a disturbing thought. So what can we do about it? If we find ourselves in a position of power, how do we stay grounded?
The book actually suggests a few things. First, remember that power, it's temporary. It doesn't last forever.
That's a good reminder.
Second, surround yourself with people you trust, people who will call you out if you start acting like a jerk.
You mean people who will give you honest feedback?
Exactly. And last but not least, stay connected to everyday people, the people who don't have power.
Okay, so stay humble.
Right. It reminds you that everyone deserves respect, no matter what their position is.
This is making me realize that just deciding to be good, it's not enough.
Definitely not. It's much more complicated than that. There are all these hidden forces that we have to be aware of.
This next trap, it's called the I deserve this mentality. And I think this one might be my biggest weakness.
This is all about moral licensing.
Moral licensing.
It's like this. We do something good, and then we feel like we've earned the right to be bad, like we can splurge or indulge a little.
Oh my gosh, that's totally me. Like if I eat healthy all week, I tell myself I deserve a giant pizza on the weekend. Or I'll be really patient with my kid all day, and then later I snap at them because I'm like, hey, I was a good parent all day.
Haha. The book gives examples like people cheating on their diets after a workout or justifying a mistake after a long time of being really loyal. It's like we have this moral scorecard in our heads. And once we've racked up enough good points, we think we can cash them in for some bad ones.
It's so true. So how do we break this cycle? I mean, it is nice to reward ourselves sometimes, right?
It is, but the key is to separate rewards from morality. Don't think of good deeds as earning you a free pass to be bad.
I like that. Separate rewards from morality.
Instead, try to find rewards that actually align with your values. So instead of that giant pizza, maybe you celebrate a healthy week with a new healthy recipe you've been wanting to try. Or instead of snapping at your kid, maybe you take some time for yourself to relax and recharge so you can keep being that patient parent.
Okay, that makes so much sense. Reward yourself without going against your values.
Exactly. All right, you ready for the last trap?
Lay it on me.
This one's called the gradual corruption effect. It's kind of sneaky.
Sneaky how?
It happens slowly, little by little. It's not like we wake up one day and decide, okay, I'm going to be bad now.
So how does it work?
It's like we compromise our values just a tiny bit, then a bit more, until all of a sudden, things that used to seem unthinkable become totally normal.
It's like that saying, the only way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time.
Exactly. It's like that. The book talks about people who start by stealing small amounts of money, just a little here and there, but then it escalates.
It gets bigger.
Or they tell a little white lie and it just snowballs into this huge web of deceit.
So politicians who take one small bribe and then another, and before they know it, they're caught up in huge corruption scandals.
It's like we slowly become numb to our own bad behavior, one small compromise at a time.
So how do we stop this? Do we have to freak out over every little mistake?
Not necessarily. It's more about being aware. Pay attention to those moments when you're starting to slip, when you think, it's just a small thing, it doesn't really matter.
So be mindful of those small compromisers.
Because those small things, they add up. Ask yourself, if I keep doing this, where will it lead? What will I become? And if the answer is somewhere you don't want to be, well, then it's time to change course.
This whole conversation is making me think about all those little decisions we make every day that seem so insignificant, like gossiping about a coworker or taking a shortcut that bends the rules a little. It's easy to just brush those things off like they don't matter.
It's easy to tell yourself it's no big deal.
But maybe those small choices, they're shaping us more than we realize.
Absolutely. Like, imagine you're building a house. Each brick on its own, it might seem small and insignificant, right?
Right.
But together, those bricks, they form the foundation of the entire house.
And if the foundation's weak?
The whole house can crumble. It's the same with our character. Every choice we make, every action, it's like laying another brick.
I'm starting to see how it all connects. So the first part of our deep dive has been pretty intense. We've uncovered a lot of unsettling things. Things about ourselves, about human nature, these traps that can lead us down a dark path, even when we don't mean to.
It can feel overwhelming, I know.
But I don't know, I'm actually feeling a little bit hopeful
Me too.
because we've learned about these traps, and now we can start to figure out how to avoid them.
Exactly. And that's what we'll be talking about in the next part of our deep dive.
We'll be right back after this quick break. So in the last part, we were talking about all these psychological traps. 5 of them, right? The ones that can, trip us up and lead us to make bad choices, even when we think we're good people. It's a lot to think about.
It is. But the good news is, just knowing about these traps is a huge step in the right direction. Awareness is key.
So now that we know they're there, what do we do? How do we avoid falling into these traps?
Well, the book really emphasizes honesty, like radical honesty with ourselves.
That sounds intense. What does that even look like?
It means being really honest about our actions and our motivations, like no sugarcoating, no making excuses, just looking at things as they really are.
Oh, I see what you mean. But that's easier said than done, right? Our egos are experts at protecting themselves.
They are. But the more we practice being honest with ourselves, the less likely we are to fall into those justification traps.
Though we have to stop sweeping our mistakes under the rug.
Exactly. It's more like holding up a mirror and saying, okay, what's really going on here?
Yeah, get real with ourselves.
And you know what? When we bring those bad impulses out into the open, when we shine a light on them, they lose a lot of their power.
I can see that.
Remember that study they talked about in the book? The one with the boring task?
The one where they paid people to lie?
Yeah. The people who got paid a lot to lie, they had no problem justifying it to themselves. They were like, well, I'm getting paid, so it's fine.
That makes sense.
But the ones who got paid almost nothing, they were the ones who had to convince themselves that the task was actually fun.
So they twisted the truth to make themselves feel better.
Exactly. Because they didn't want to feel like hypocrites.
Okay, so radical honesty. Got it. What's next?
The book also talks a lot about the importance of our support system, the people we surround ourselves with.
Our friends and family.
Yes, but think of it more like building a personal board of ethics.
A board of ethics.
Yeah, like a team of trusted advisors. These are people who share your values and are willing to call you out when you start to stray from them.
I love that. So it's like having a built-in accountability system.
Exactly. And you can go to these people when you're facing a tough decision or when you're tempted to compromise your values, and they can help you see things more clearly.
They can remind you of what's really important.
Exactly. It's like having a safety net, knowing that you don't have to go through those difficult situations alone. And, the book even suggests actually asking for challenges from these people.
So don't just surround yourself with yes people.
Exactly. Don't be afraid of a little constructive criticism. Be open to different viewpoints, even when they make you uncomfortable.
It's funny, right? We always say it's good to be bold and speak your mind, but when it comes to our own lives, it's so hard to do that, even with people we're close to.
It's so true. We avoid conflict like it's the plague, but sometimes a little bit of healthy conflict is exactly what we need.
To grow and stay true to ourselves.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got radical honesty and building a supportive network. What's the last piece of advice from the book?
Lay it on me.
It's all about paying attention to the small stuff.
The small stuff, like what?
Those everyday decisions that seem insignificant. Like we talked about before, gossiping about a coworker or taking a shortcut that maybe bends the rules a little bit.
It's easy to tell yourself those things don't really matter.
But you know what? Our lives are actually shaped by those tiny decisions that we make day after day. It's the accumulation of all those little choices.
Oh, I like that. It's like that quote. Watch your thoughts, for they become words. Watch your words, for they become actions. Watch your actions, for they become habits. Watch your habits, for they become character. Watch your character, for it becomes your destiny.
That's such a great quote. And it's so true. Every choice we make, no matter how small, contributes to the bigger picture of our lives.
So it's not just about avoiding those big moral disasters. It's about being mindful, even in those tiny everyday moments.
Right. Like when you're tempted to tell a little white lie or to justify being selfish.
Because if we're not careful, those little compromises can turn into big problems.
Yes. It's like building a house. Each brick, on its own, might seem small and insignificant. But all those bricks together, they form the foundation of the entire house.
And a weak foundation can lead to a shaky house.
Exactly. So we have to be mindful of the foundation we're building for our own lives, our own character. And it all starts with those seemingly small choices that we make every day.
One of the things I really appreciate about this book is that it doesn't pretend to have all the answers. It doesn't give us some magic formula for being a good person.
It's more about recognizing how complex human nature really is.
Yeah, and it gives us tools and strategies to navigate that complexity, to make better choices and to keep moving in the right direction.
It's a lifelong journey. We're all going to mess up sometimes. We're all human.
But the important thing is to keep learning and keep growing, to keep striving to live a life that aligns with our values.
And remember, you don't have to do it alone. We all need that support system, people we can trust to guide us and help us stay on track. Now that you're aware of these traps, how will you use this knowledge? How will you make those everyday choices that will shape your life? What small step can you take today to be a little bit better, a little bit truer to yourself?
Those are some great questions to think about. And with that, we'll be back for the final part of our deep dive. After spending all this time talking about the dark side of human nature, all these ways we can mess up, I actually feel kind of hopeful.
It is interesting, isn't it? It's like once you see the traps, you're less likely to fall into them. And the book doesn't just point out the problems, it also challenges us to do something about it, to use this knowledge to make better choices.
Right. It's like we've been given this map that shows us all the dangerous cliffs and the hidden ravines. It's scary to realize they're there, but at least now we know to avoid them.
Exactly. And it's not about being perfect. Nobody's perfect. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all human.
Right. It's not about never falling down. It's about getting back up and learning from our mistakes.
Yeah, it's about being aware of what can trip us up and having a plan for how to get back on track when we do.
It's like learning to ride a bike. You're going to fall a few times. You might even skin your knees. But eventually, you figure it out. You find your balance, and you're off, enjoying the ride.
I love that analogy. And just like with riding a bike, the more you practice, the better you get. So the more we practice being self-aware, the more we practice honesty and all those other things we talked about, well, the better we'll become at navigating those tricky moral situations.
Thinking back on those 5 traps, the justification trap, the herd mentality, the power corruption effect, the I deserve this mentality, and the gradual corruption effect, it seems like they're all connected somehow.
They are. They all come back to these basic human needs and desires that we all have, like wanting to feel good about ourselves, wanting to belong, wanting to feel powerful, and wanting to be rewarded for our efforts. Those things are all part of being human.
Right, but it's like there's this tug of war going on inside us.
Oh, I like that.
On one side, we have our ideals, our values, who we want to be, and on the other side, we have these impulses that can pull us in the wrong direction.
That's a great way to put it. And what we've been talking about is how to strengthen that side with the ideals, how to make those values stronger, how to be more self-aware, how to surround ourselves with people who support us, and how to practice making good choices, even in those small, everyday moments.
I think this deep dive has been so valuable. It's made me realize that living a good life, a life of integrity, it's not just about having good intentions. It's also about understanding these hidden traps that can trip us up, even when we have the best intentions. And it's about having the tools to avoid those traps.
And it's about taking responsibility for our actions, every choice we make. Because all those choices, even the small ones, they all add up to shape who we are.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question. What small choice can you make today to live a life that's more in line with your values?
Maybe it's speaking up when you see something unfair. Or maybe it's resisting the urge to gossip. Or maybe it's choosing to be honest, even when it's inconvenient.
Whatever it is, remember that you have the power to choose. You get to write your own story.
And that story is still being written. Every day is a new opportunity to choose a different path, to make a better choice, to become a little bit closer to the person you want to be.
It's amazing how even when we're exploring the dark side of human nature, we can find hope. Because we always have the power to choose the light. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time.